It is the Obstructed View podcast. And boy, happy holidays to you. Very special edition as we have the first 12-team playoff that starts up Friday evening, taping this on a Thursday. And hopefully you'll be listening to this Friday, maybe into the day Saturday. And we'll do some previews of the college football playoff. And can't help but think about Baylor's, how close when they ended up 8-4, and of course the Colorado game could have gone the other direction easily with the Hail Mary. Baylor, could have been. I mean, there's no reason in the world why they couldn't have been kind of like Clemson, win the Big 12 title game and get in as a 9-3 team. And the Bears were not far from that, and so that should create a lot of excitement as we get ready to watch all these games. By the way, you sprinkle in the we got all kinds of NFL games as well. What a day. We're going to have like an 11 o'clock start with on Saturday, SMU and Penn State. And then at noon, talking about noon central, obviously, you got an NFL game. And I mean, it just the whole day unfolds. And then, of course, you'll have Texas and Clemson playing. And then there's another NFL game. And then, you got just a massive triple header of games, the college football games. And then so we'll get to SMU and Penn State. We'll get Texas and Clemson. And then we'll have Ohio State and Tennessee. I mean, just very exciting. We'll hit that. But I first wanted to talk about what the Baylor Bears are doing in the portal. And well, there are a couple teams. It's interesting because I do think with Joey McGuire leaving Baylor to become the head coach at Tech, there's always kind of like maybe they're fighting over some of the same players, both out of high school and in the portal. Tech has obviously been extremely active in the portal, and so they're getting a lot of great attention and rankings, and that's great. But the Bears, but Baylor just had probably its best 48-hour period in portal history. In the young history, I mean, the portal's now been around about 3 or 4 years now. We're kind of used to it. I guess 4 years really. And some teams are better than others. Baylor did not embrace it at first. They do embrace it now. And it's been a remarkable run. And I think the great thing is it's not just like, let's piecemeal this thing and let's get like 20 dudes in here. I mean, you have programs, and for better or for worse, that are losing 24 to 25 players already. I mean, maybe OU wanted to lose a lot of players. Maybe USC. What's crazy about, like, with USC is Lincoln Riley did a good job in his first two seasons there recruiting-wise and got, let's see, like 13 4 and 5 stars. I mean, just had some really top-quality recruits. 9 of those 13 have already departed now, including this portal. So there's a lot of interesting things going on in the portal. I want to bring you up to date on Baylor's, and I'll talk about some of these players, and I'll try to think about what Baylor's doing. I think you saw it with Keaton Thomas last year, who started out at West Virginia, then went to JUCO. Baylor has a certain type of player they're looking for in the portal. They want somebody that'll step in and help immediately. They're looking for leaders. They're looking for possible captains on their teams, that kind of thing. And then occasionally they will dip into a project type player. So let me tell you, like, for instance, the player from Tulane that they got is extremely productive. The big tackle, 6'6", 305, offensive tackle out of Louisville, didn't play much for the 2 years there. This is Mason Miller, Baylor's O-line coach, having some inside information on this guy. In fact, he was briefly committed to Mississippi State when Mason Miller was there. So, again, some of these guys should come in and help immediately. Cole Wilson, who comes in, another Texas State transfer. They got Ashton Hawkins this past season. They found another extremely productive player out of Texas State. Let me tell you, where teams, not just Baylor, is, they like to look at UNT's roster, UTSA, Texas State, Incarnate Word. I mean, places where they don't have to be the greatest programs. somewhat successful programs, I would say, even like Sam Houston State's now is getting more and more attention. But man, whether it be edge rushers, sometimes it's safeties, those rosters get rated, and Baylor's certainly among the group that's looking at that. I think um, there was a kid named Phoenix Jackson out of Fresno State that the Bears landed, and Auburn thought they had him, and it looked like he was maybe headed that way. The winds changed. He ended up at Baylor. I think that's a great thing for Dave Aranda and his staff. I think it's also a sign that the NIL is getting where it needs to be, and then they like to pick and choose, and I think they like extremely smart and tough players on defense, and the safety, Devin Turner out of Northwestern. I mean, he fits the role they're looking for. They got great young players. When you think about Corey Gordon Jr., when you think about our man Carl and what he's brought, and of course, Carl Williams, I'm talking about, waiting for him to get healthy. There have been reports, and in fact, reporters that were on the scene for the first kind of bowl practices as the Bears get ready for the Texas Bowl in Houston against LSU, that Carl is back on the field. That said, I mean, you just can't. You saw this year with the injuries in the secondary, you can't have enough. I mean, it's been really nice to have players like Tevin Williams, like Devin Bobby. I mean, have some snacks coming back. Thought he did some really good things this season, but they also have had a youth movement at that position. That's Caden Jenkins, that's Corey, that's DJ. I mean, you go across the board, they got some really, really fine, some good young players. And sometimes guys have gotten thrown in there that weren't quite ready. And so they need to create more depth there, and that's what they did in going to Northwestern. Now, let me talk about a couple more of these players, because some of these guys I remember from the Bears being interested before. Tomorrow, which is Friday, as we talk here and record this on Thursday, quarterback Walker White, and I know anybody who watched Breaking Bad, wants to read that as Walter White, is set to visit Baylor. So this will be Friday, which maybe that's today as you're listening to this. He is on the ground. I remember watching his decision. Baylor was in the mix. Auburn was in the mix, and a couple of years ago, he chose Auburn. And, Sean Bell played a role in his recruitment. Sean Bell's now at Houston, and we'll see where Sean ends up, because they've just made a pick. Sean was in the mix for Sam Houston State, the head coaching job there, but they picked Phil Longo to become the coach there. And Phil's got a pretty good reputation, air raid guy. He's been around. He's been at some big schools. He was just at Wisconsin, actually, as their offensive coordinator, being replaced, by the way, by Jeff Grimes, an old name might remember from Baylor. So we'll see where Sean ends up. But, some of his work from when he was with Baylor, and I was a little bit critical of Sean because they had trouble getting some of these guys to campus. Obviously, they lost Novosad, and that felt really bad a couple of recruiting classes ago when that happened. But man, they've bounced 2022 recruiting class. They've bounced back since then. They got Sawyer Robertson. Obviously, he's been great. He's going to be a Heisman candidate. And if Walker commits to Baylor, it just adds it's just a lot of competition, because you have Nate Bennett, who's technically the backup right now, with DeQuan Finn transferring out. And Nate was a member of I guess that was the 2023 recruiting class. I'm trying to think. He got to campus so quickly. So 2024, perhaps, for Nate Bennett. But they missed out. They didn't get quarterbacks really in 2022, 23, 21 was Kyron Drones. Obviously, he's at Virginia Tech now. Zeno was a really nice quarterback, even going all the way back to 2019 when they nearly beat Oklahoma in the Big 12 title game. Zeno is now at Texas A&M, believe it or not. After going to UAB, playing well there, he has now been picked up by the Aggies. So it's not like the Bears haven't hit on good quarterbacks. They just, because of various reasons, some of them have ended up with other programs. To have another shot at Walker White, who, again, was one of the top quarterbacks in the country, I think speaks to keeping in touch, establishing a great relationship in the first place. And then, of course, when he chose Auburn, it's not like they just completely turned on him. They have a standing relationship. All right, the other players are the Louisville offensive lineman I talked about is Joe Crocker. And he spent 2 years with Louisville, and Baylor added Cole Wilson that I talked about from Texas State. And then, I think that's going to be a really good one. And then Devin Turner, who I talked about, is the safety out of Northwestern. Want to make sure I'm not missing anybody. Phoenix Jackson is the transfer out of Fresno State. And again, that's a linebacker. Again, in the vein of he was considered one of the top run defenders in the country by Pro Football Focus. PFF grades a lot of these players, and they put a lot of time into that. And so he came up big there. I think that's an interesting one because, again, Auburn was in the mix for him. I think when you start winning battles against a team, an SEC team that has a lot in the bank, I think that's a great thing. The other one is Kobe Prentice from Alabama, and you can look at his highlights. He's been out there for a while, and he's been at Alabama. He's had 3 seasons there. I would say maybe his first 2 seasons were even better than this past season. Got speed, seemed to always be open, hit some deep balls, ended up with about 800 yards and 6-7 touchdowns over his career at Alabama. But as we've seen with SMU, I think what we're seeing is, and Keenan Hall did this when he was at SMU, and Keenan Hall's Baylor's assistant head coach and running backs coach. These players that go to Alabama, Auburn, wherever, Northwestern, in Devin Turner's case, a lot of them end up, they're Texas kids, and they want to come back home. And, in the case of, we were just talking about one of the Baylor's players that's coming in is from Frisco. For some reason, that area of the Dallas-Fort Worth area puts out a great number of DBs. We remember Raleigh Tejada here. All 3 Tejada players played college football and played it extremely well at TCU, Baylor, and North Texas. But Frisco, for whatever reason, it's not just Baylor. They just constantly are sending DBs out into college football. So always kind of fun when you get somebody from that area. Keenan is doing a great job recruiting that I-20 corridor in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. North Crowley's become incredible. They're playing for the state title on Saturday. Cedar Hill, Duncanville, DeSoto, all up and down, Lancaster, and Baylor's starting to get some of those players. And again, the great thing about it is when you establish relationships from recruiting those kids 2 and 3 years ago, some of them go off, they get away from home. Maybe they're too far away. Maybe they're not getting the playing time they want. Whatever the reason, a lot of them are looking to get back home closer to family. When that happens, you got to be ready. And that is where the portal is right now. And again, this is the last we had from a guy who comes on my radio show a lot and comes on with us here at Rogue on the Obstructed View. That's Will Turboff. And he had it ranked, and his colleagues at 247 Sports have Baylor ranked 16th in the country in the portal. Now, that was before I think they got this latest batch, so that you have to kind of add in, if Walker White signs as coveted a quarterback as he is, I think it could jump up to like 12th in the country. All right, you have people right now talking about Texas Tech possibly challenging for number 1 in the country. I would say that though they've got some really good players, don't get me wrong. They also lost Micah Hudson to Texas A&M, the great player out of Lake Belton, the great receiver. They're going right now with a quantity, and they're getting a lot of players in the portal. Joey has responded well to having a down season and having to let go. Lost one coordinator who became a head coach, fired one coordinator, and he's got 2 young coordinators now. One of them comes in from Texas State, who's gained a lot of attention, Leftwich, and then on the defensive side of the ball, he actually hired somebody that is considered one of the great young defensive coordinators in the state of Texas. So I think Tech, Baylor, making huge additions and huge strides in this offseason. And, there's something to be said about, I didn't know how this would play out, but now that, UT and Oklahoma are out of the conference, it's not that you're still not fighting them for players, but it's just a little bit different pitch. You're not when they're in a different conference. And there's some things you can tout about the Big 12. There's some, and again, there's a reason. Like even Arizona and Arizona State now in the Big 12, man, they target Texas players like crazy. BYU does it. You go around the country, they know where the best players are. And when you look at these rosters, that's why, whether it be Alabama, Georgia, who I was just mentioning, Arizona State, Arizona, these Texas kids don't always love being that far away from home. So you can kind of catch them on the rebound. I think Baylor is exploiting not being, in the same conference with Texas and OU. For some reason, it feels like they've built momentum, and while I'm not saying they're not occasionally trying to do battle with them, it just doesn't really, they're not afraid to pick off some kids from them. But right now, their level of conviction in who they want, how quickly they move to get them, how much it cost, they're just a lot more definitive. And I think even though a lot of us were ready for a new coach, especially when they were 2-4, and even at the end of last year, thought they should have made the move. And yet the decision to keep Dave Aranda, it kept the 2025 class together. And quite honestly, he's way better with these families than I even realized. I mean, like, I talked to some coach. I talked to a high school coach. I'm trying to think who it was, but I talked to someone recently that would know, that kind of has a front row seat to some of the recruiting. And they were talking to all of these recent, Kamar Morgan, who's playing in the state title for South Oak Cliff on Saturday. Burns, who's up from the Houston area, Caleb Burns, all these players, when they talk to the writers who cover all this stuff, they all mention, and not Keenan and all, don't get me wrong, he's had a huge impact. But a lot of them, when they say, why did you stick with this? Why, even when Baylor was going the wrong direction, why did you stick with your commitment? Talking about the young man from Red Oak that is Taz Williams, that's gotten so much acclaim. And they all mention Aranda. And while he's not the flashiest guy, he's not going to be out there with the best slogans, although We Pay Players was a pretty good one. But he's not a big, pizzazz type guy. He is extremely genuine, and that still plays. And now money talks. I get it. You got to get the money right. But almost everybody you're going against has money. You think TCU, you think Tech, think Houston. Maybe, Houston maybe struggles more than some of those others. But for the most part, everybody you're battling with has a nice NIL budget. So what do you have that is distinctive and distinguishes you from others? And I think with Aranda, it's simply being genuine. The families love him, and he's a football guy. And in fact, I talked to a former TCU player who has a son that plays at TCU now, but he was just saying, like, among parents and among former players, and he was a former player, and he played for Gary Patterson, and he was saying, there is a belief that Aranda just knows football more than most people. And in an age where you have a lot of CEO head coaches, and don't get me wrong, I mean, you think Sark doesn't know football. Sark can draw up any play in the world, but there's something to be said for a coach who gains like huge respect from just his peers, former players, everything, for his football acumen. And when people get around, if they can get them in the same room with Dave, there's a level that he engages with that is it's a whole different experience. So all that to say, tremendous start to the portal for the Bears, and I'll have coverage both for Obstructed View and, of course, ESPN Central Texas from the bowl game in Houston. Be broadcasting from there, and excited to talk to you about all that. Now, wanted to really quickly look at some of these college football playoff games and look at the preview. I thought I looked at the weather, by the way. I think the elements are going to play a role. South Bend, that first game that is Indiana and going to South Bend to play Notre Dame. It's about 200 miles, if you're wondering, from Bloomington. 29 degrees at kickoff, snow earlier in the day. The Penn State SMU game, that'll be Saturday morning. It's 11 a.m. kick. 27 degrees and partly cloudy at kickoff. In Austin, where Clemson comes in, and Texas is favored here by around a touchdown. All of ESPN's bells and whistles and their FP, when they kind of put all the computer rankings in and everything, I think they have Texas winning by 9.1 points, I think I saw. But it's going to be, that's the only place where the elements shouldn't play much of a role. 61 degrees and sunny at kickoff for that one. And then in Columbus, as Tennessee heads in there, 26 degrees and partly cloudy at kickoff. Some odds I thought were kind of interesting as far as projections. And the SP Plus is what I was kind of trying to think of that ESPN does. And there's only a 20% chance that all four favorites will win. Okay. Now, again, who do they have? I thought this was interesting. You would think the best odds of making it to the semifinal would be Oregon because they're undefeated. They've been great all season, but they have a 51.9% projection according to all. Again, this is SP Plus with all these computer, plugging all the percentages into this. Texas, University of Texas, because of their route, let's remember what it would be. That would be really interesting to see their route. If they win against Clemson, they play Arizona State in that next round. And so they have Texas with a 66.6% chance to make it to the semifinals. The only one else in the 50s is Georgia with a 53.8% chance to make the semifinals. Now, you may think SMU might be at the very bottom. Indiana, no. Well, let's see. SMU has a 26.5% chance to make it to the semifinal. It's not bad. That's not bad. In fact, Tennessee, Indiana, and Clemson all have lower percentages than that, according to ESPN. Boise State has about the same. Arizona State also has less than SMU. Just to cherry pick a couple of these games that I kind of want to look at, I would just say this is going to be fascinating because Notre Dame and Riley Leonard's come along. He was struggling through his first three games. I mean, even when they beat A&M, it's not like he was playing great at all. A&M just wasn't good on offense. And since the week 3, he's been like a top 5 QBR guy in the country. Like so he was rough early, and we remember that. We remember them losing to Northern Illinois. But other than that loss, I mean, they've just taken care of business all season. So I think the interesting thing is what they do best is they have these two running backs who both average, combined about over 7 yards a carry and up around 140 yards per game between the two of them. I mean, it's a really solid rushing attack. What does Indiana do well? They're really good against the run. They're one of the best in the country at it. They're great at linebacker. They have a couple of linebackers that play incredibly well. They got a great edge player against the run. So I think that's something to watch. Going to be so much fun Friday night watching that one. And then some of these other matchups. since we have a lot of listeners, I think that, obviously with our old SWC ties in the Metroplex, and so many of our listeners are and viewers are in the Metroplex, the SMU Penn State game. I hate it for SMU that they're going into. They looked extremely uncomfortable in that bowl game against Boston College. I think that was at Fenway, at the or was that Yankee Stadium? It may have been at Fenway. Anyway, last year, I'm trying to think. It might have been the Pinstripe Bowl, actually, in Yankee Stadium. All I remember is because of the elements, Kevin Jennings, the whole group, they looked extremely uncomfortable in last year's bowl game. This is a totally different team, much deeper team. They got some guys. Now, again, they had some drops that I thought, that kind of really hurt them early in that game against Clemson. They got the big hole. They came storming back. I don't think Penn State's a team you can do that. You cannot fall even 2 touchdowns behind Penn State because they'll just kind of sit on you. They actually have a better quarterback than usual. When I think of Penn State over the last decade or whatever, it's been under James Franklin. They've had some really good teams, but they're at their best when they have a great running back. I'm not saying they hadn't had somebody drafted, but I'm just saying the quarterbacks. This Drew Aller, he's a better guy. He's a better player, and they do have some downfield threats, and they have some threats in the special teams. I just think maybe Penn State has a little more speed than we've given them credit for in the past. I don't always know if that totally matters when it's like 29 and messy and all that outside. A lot of that will come down to who's physical. And what Rhett Lashley has kind of quietly done at SMU is I just think because we think back the old Pony Express and we think of SMU as this young upstart, and they are good at wideout. They do have good perimeter players, but they're also extremely physical. And I'm hoping that shows up in the elements and that they stand up. And I'm not saying they're going to win this game, but I think they could make it extremely close. And it's gonna be a fun one. And if they win this game, wouldn't that be incredible? First year in the ACC and to advance, it is quite a story to think about. And if they do, they've got a path. There's a path there. So I think that one's incredible. I think Clemson and Texas. I would say this is not by any stretch one of Dabo's great Clemson teams. I would say Klubnik, who will be playing in a place that he's very familiar with, having grown up around there. Actually, he grew up in an Aggie family, but he grew up in Austin, played in Austin. High school football. This is with Ewers against Klubnik, and then you saw that Clemson had some game breakers at wideout. In fact, they had a guy from Midlothian that gave SMU fits, especially in that first half, and he just kept getting behind them for touchdowns. So they have plenty of firepower. We'll see if they can slow. You saw when SMU got rolling, they didn't have answers, and SMU through the better part of that whole second half was just a better team. It just showed, hey, this was an aberration. What happened in the first half? This is who we are. And they came rolling back, especially in that fourth quarter. It was a tremendous comeback. I think that Texas is okay in this matchup. I just think they're deeper. We'll see. They've been banged up a little on the offensive line. They've had some running backs out, and Ewers has strangely, again, I think he's fine. I think he's going to get drafted probably in the second round. I think he's fine. I just think, man, occasionally, and you saw it in that first half against Georgia. Here they go. They can go up and down the field, and yet they had nothing to show for it in that game. They're up 6-3 at halftime, and they're just killing them in yardage and first downs and everything. And then they get beat with a backup quarterback who honestly wasn't that. He didn't look that great. He did a nice job. He held things together, but he threw a horrible interception at the end of the game, and Texas still couldn't get that done against Georgia. Boy, if Clemson's in this game at halftime, then we got something. We got something. My gut tells me Texas is going to be up like 21-7, almost kind of like what Clemson had SMU down. And if they do that, they can kind of sit on it. I think Texas's defense is great. I know they've got the 2 losses against Georgia, but for the most part, I think the rush is excellent. I love Taff. I like Jahdae Barron is incredible. He's got great range. He's got great ball skills. Starting to sound like Mel Kiper here, but he's an incredible player, and he deserves all the All-American honors and everything he's gotten. And he was a great one. And again, it still hurts me because he was a Baylor commit back in the day, and he's gone on to become one of the all-time. I mean, he is just a tremendous defender for the University of Texas. That leaves us Tennessee and Ohio State. And how's Ohio State, for whatever reason, they don't function well against Michigan. Haven't, under Ryan Day. He may someday get fired because of that, but it won't be right now. And I just think as long as for some reason, Michigan has their number right now, Michigan's not in this tournament. They're not in these playoffs. And so I think Ohio State at home should be fine. Do I trust? Let me think about this. Which of all these quarterbacks who are playing, and obviously we'll leave out the people like Arizona State, Boise State, Georgia, and Oregon because they have the bye. But I think you got to ask the question in these games is like, which quarterback do we trust the least? Okay. I would say that Will Howard at Ohio State, I liked him, but if you'll recall, even at Kansas State, at times he couldn't hold the job. He was sharing the job. He would reclaim it, then he wouldn't have it for a few. I mean, this was not, to me, a slam dunk portal move, and I turned out to be right on that. Even though they've had a fine season, they're in the playoff. Let's not act like he's one of the great Ohio State quarterbacks. In fact, if he's even a day 3 NFL pick, it'll just be because he's playing for Ohio State. Again, he was a nice player at K-State. But I would say out of everybody playing, I trust him maybe the least. Maybe the least. And again, you think at home they'll be okay, but I think he'll throw you the ball. I think he'll throw a pick. Let me tell you something about Curtis Rourke at Indiana. And because I would think most of our listeners haven't watched a ton of Indiana football. They only know they've had a great season, and they've had a combination of a tremendous portal work. They got like 16 players in the portal. They got a good schedule, and they got this old coach who's 63, and he's done an incredible job, and the schedule, again, set up for them extremely well. Cignetti is their coach. This quarterback, it's feast or famine. He's either great against the blitz or he's horrible against the blitz. His big plays this season has come when he's under heavy fire, and he can make plays. Okay, so you got to think about that if you're going to come after him. If you're Notre Dame, but he's also made just back-breaking mistakes against the blitz. So I would say of the quarterbacks in this thing, who are the quarterbacks I trust the least? I would say the Ohio State. Then I would say Indiana. Then I would say the guy, I would say probably Klubnik next at Clemson. And then I don't have just great trust in Nico, the Tennessee quarterback. I love Kevin Jennings, man. He was not playing great, and he just looked a little snake bit early in that game against Clemson, the SMU quarterback. But I also think all his skills and what he does and his traits, his leadership traits. I mean, if anybody could drag SMU in there and get a win, it's him. And I do think Penn State, year after year after year, their record always seems a little fraudulent, right? Every time he goes up against a top 10 team, whether it be Ohio State, whether it be Michigan in the past, not this season, obviously, but in the past, it doesn't work out. It doesn't work out. They win the games they're supposed to win, but the ones where it's either a toss-up or they have a huge game, they don't always get it done. This is a big game. I mean, this is the freaking playoffs. And so I'm so fired up about this day, and so how cool will that be to get an 11 a.m. playoff game? We got the night game Friday night. We got incredible Texas high school football playoffs, and as I'm recording this on Thursday, let me remind you, especially our local folks, well, really all over Texas, but especially the Waco area, La Vega. That's Friday morning at 11 a.m. They tee it up with Carthage. Carthage is a great program. Since 2008, they've won 8 state titles. They're incredible. I mean, they're only behind Alito in terms of just the number of state titles in that Class 4A. I mean, well, it doesn't matter what division. They're the primo team. And here is La Vega out of the Waco area. And they've got a sophomore quarterback, so they're going to be at it for the next few years. His last name is Parr, P-A-R-R, Courtney Parr, I believe it is. And they got a great running back, Roland. They got tremendous coaching staff, Don Hyde. So that's Friday. That's Friday at 11 in the morning. Then at night, we got this is going to be so incredible to watch all this over the next couple of days. So I just thought we would do kind of a smorgasbord of Baylor plus the college football playoff preview. And I got to go do a radio show here in a second. So anyway, great to be with you. Thank you, Josh from Rogue Media Network, Mike Hamilton, Corey Dickman, my buddy Zach, the whole gang. Happy holidays from me and our whole staff here at Rogue. We appreciate it. That has been the Obstructed View podcast.
We are Rogue Media Sports.